How are you, Giles? You okay?
I'm great, actually. Just the usual busy, right? Like you guys, right? We're always hustling. I'm super excited about this deal. Actually, there's an article I'm going to get to you guys that just came out, I think 2 days ago, and it was talking. Don't remember if it was Time or one of those really large publications, but it was a very long article about how this student loan problem, Biden made a giant effort to try to bring some relief to it. And when he left office, the debt was actually significantly larger than when he came in, despite his efforts. It's a funny thing. It's in the US when it comes to debt, right? Because I think the world looks at our debt and has heart attacks, right? What in the world are they doing? How can they have more debt than the rest of the world combined? But I think for Americans, we at least for the financial guys, we look at it in two different pieces. And if it's money owed by America to other Americans, we don't think of it as anywhere near as significant. Whereas if it's internet, because it's really, you're just going to be circulating the same money, right? You get the multiplier effect. So if we're sending people their Social Security payments, they're then going to go pay rent. They're going to buy food. They're going to, right? And so that you're getting that multiplier effect from that money into the economy. So you're really not it's a way less expensive than it sounds, right? Because the money's still flowing through the system and moving the system. It's when you have the international debt that it gets really different. But that being said, the student loan thing, I think I told you guys this as a reference point. The U.S. student loan market right now, there's $1.9 trillion of debt. Yeah. Trillion. The entire credit card market of the entire country of the U.S., and I think we are the most credit card heavy people in the world, is only $1.4 trillion. The entire auto loan industry, and I think we might own the most cars in the world, is $1.2 trillion. So the student loan market is just really upside down. And as you and I have talked about, Ben, 10, 11% of that market is private student loans. So it's a massive, that's 150 to $200 billion at any given time, of which 30, 40, even times 50% of it is either stressed, distressed, or in default. A lot of that money that qualifies in that category are people with good jobs. They're young professionals. They pay the car payment. They pay the rent. They pay the credit card payment. But then at the end of the month, they're just short of that cash for the student loan payment. And the really weird thing in our student loan market, and this is in the federal side and in the private side, is when you fall behind paying your student loan, literally, it's exactly like our credit card market. So if Nathan had, just to use a round number, $100,000 of student loans, which is, to be honest, not that unusual. Our colleges are very expensive. He has $100,000 of student loans. He gets 60 days behind paying. He's between jobs, he has an emergency of some kind. He literally, his interest rate effectively goes from that 5, 6, 7% to 19 to 21%. Well, the second that happens, he is now in a hole he's never getting out of, right? Because for most families, even now, Nathan's in a hole that they can't even really help, right? So that's why this program because what I think is interesting, Ben, for anyone who watches this, who's thinking of investing, is I'm an investor, right? So KG Investments, and if anyone listening goes to kginvest.net, my partner and I have been investing our own money for 25 years, right? We were in the U.S. it's called a family office. I think that's the same in the U.K. as well. And so we looked at this as an investor and just thought, okay, that's a massively large market with no solutions. Like there's no one trying to even solve that problem. In the student loan market, on the other end of the extreme, if you have a very high credit score and you make a lot of money, there are groups that will refi your healthy debt. So you'll go from paying 7.5% to 5.5%. SoFi is the biggest one in the US. They don't come near our side of the market. And I told you a very funny story. So we looked at this as an investor and thought, wow, there's an amazing opportunity, because you're able to buy this paper at such a cheap price after, and this is the real secret sauce that amazed us. And like I said, we've been in this investment now for 5 years. And the way we work, Ben and Nathan, when we're looking at an investment like this, we will seed it with our own money. before we'll talk to before we'll let other family offices come and join with us, before we'll talk to groups like yours and say, hey, now it's time to make this bigger, we always put our own money in. And what we did with this deal, we went a step further, is we took the management team 5 years ago and we put them into our office space with us. They eventually grew to 50 employees. So we watched them very closely. And what we saw was, man, this paper just performs. The default rate is so low because the underwriting, and that's really the secret sauce, because think of this as most people in the world have heard of Citibank, right? So Citibank's a very large US bank. Citibank does have, or at least in the past has had, private student loan programs. So they have made a lot of these private student loans. Right. So for Citibank, they're sitting there and they're saying, let's again we'll pick on Nathan here. So Nathan owes them $100,000 of student loans. He's 28 years old. He has a good job, but now he's into this crazy interest rate. He can't make the payment. So he's getting further and further behind. So in Citibank's eyes, the value of Nathan's loan is going down every 30 to 60 days. They're just marking it lower, lower, lower. Now, what they don't realize is my team has connected with Nathan. We've marketed to him, and we've now done a full traditional underwriting on Nathan. Same as you would for a credit card or an auto loan. And we've seen exactly what we said. Hey, wow, this guy's a healthy guy. Hardworking, good job. The amount of money he owes in his life is not upside down. He should be in good position, but he just made a mistake and got himself in this bad position and he can't get out of it. So we basically say to Nathan, if we buy your loan, we're going to take it from, you owe $100,000. You're still going to owe us $100,000, but we're going to turn it into a 10-year note, and you're going to pay us 5% interest. And here's what I loved about this. It's always great to make money if you can make money and also be doing some good, right? It's hard to find. We all try to do it, and a lot of times it doesn't work out. But what's great in this deal is if we buy Nathan's loan, Nathan literally over the life of that loan will pay back 40 to 50% less gross dollars, just because we're dropping his interest rate down so low. So for him, it's a home run. It dramatically changes his life. For us, now what we do though is, and this is the secret sauce, we do that full underwriting. We then take those extra couple steps where we make him do the escrow payments of the new payment. We then also make him get 80-85% of the time a healthy cosigner. That's fantastic, guys, because now I've done all this, basically what you would call credit repair with Nathan. I've spent 90 days with him. He's talked to our people a bunch. We've helped him get his house in order. We now know that this is a much better loan than what it's, but take it from now the Citibank's perspective. From their perspective, it's 90 days more he hasn't made a payment. So now in their mind, his loan is worth less than it was 90 days ago. Whereas we know it's significantly more value. Now is when we then go to purchase that loan from Citi. We've done all that credit repair. We now know this is going to be a high-performing loan. We're buying it from Citi at 30, 35 cents on the dollar because in their mind, this is a bad loan. And so we buy that loan and then so like I said, we heard the model. We thought it sounded really interesting, but we had some questions like, okay, because to be honest, man, when I first heard this, my number one concern as an investor, because we put our own money in, we put money in equity, we put money in debt for them to go build a portfolio for us to start seeing it. And my concern was, because you see these sometimes where somebody has a cool way or an interesting way to skin the cat, but what they don't, but it can't scale. And so we weren't interested as an investment group to say, hey guys, let's go do $10 million worth of loans, right? That's just not what we do as an investor, right? So what we've said is, hey, look, this market is massive. The problem is massive. No one has a solution. There's the potential to do billions of dollars of this paper. And that was our interest. And so what we really wanted these guys to prove to us was two things. And this is why we seeded it the way we did. I wanted them to prove that they could scale. Guys, you're telling me there's a huge market there, but show me that you can access that market and there's going to be that much demand for what we're doing. That was number one. And then number two, they're telling us that they thought they'd run at a default rate of 2.5% to 3%. Well, anyone who works in debt, and you're telling them I'm buying an asset for 30 cents, 35 cents on the dollar, that's only going to run at a 3% default rate, is thinking that can't be right? Because that's too good to be true, right? And so we basically just said, look, guys, we we did a lot of homework, luckily, and we got very fortunate here. And this ties us back to Mark Brenner, who's now the CEO. In my due diligence process, there was a hedge fund group I knew who did a lot of specialty credit, specialty finance. And so I called them and I said, hey, do you have anybody who's looked at the student loan market? My buddy who is the portfolio manager. And he basically said, hey, Giles, you know, it's interesting. One of my closest friends ran the second largest student loan organization in the whole country. And he and his partner built it from zero to 18 to $20 billion, super successful. And then they sold it. And he's a great friend of mine. His name was Mark Brenner. So my buddy, that's how I met Mark. And so Mark helped us originally with the due diligence on this deal. So there's a different CEO in place. And so Mark's feedback was super helpful. And I was like, wow, this guy really knows the space. And he was like, Giles, honestly, they're correct that market is that big. They're correct that there's a ton of healthy people that are stuck in that category that if you help them could really be great performing loans. So he said, I think it's pretty damn interesting. So we seeded it, we did it. And I got to say, the default rate did not run at 3%. The default rate ran at 2.5% over the whole, right? And so, and I'll tell you guys a funny conversation I had. So we reached out right before COVID to 5 or 6 of the larger private equity firms in the US. And I had a very interesting exchange with the gentleman that ran his specialty credit, the entire division, happened to be a very close friend of a very close friend of mine. So he connected us. Very nice guy. And I walked him through what we were looking at and what we had seen, how we had seeded it for over a year, gave him the numbers. And he was like, Giles, first off, I can't believe this market's this big and I've never even heard of it, right? Because they obviously had an enormous amount of money they put to work. So he was like, I credit you on that because I'm going to go yell at somebody for why didn't we know this market's there, right? So he's a really nice guy. And he said, look, I'm going to have my team really dive into this. This is really interesting. So over a period of about 60 days, you know, there's 20 different not Zoom back then, regular conference calls that we fly to New York to meet with them. They fly here to meet with the team. And again, like I said, it was a different CEO, still Mary Jo and her team that ran the business, but the CEO is a different guy. So finally, after about 60 days, I get a phone call on my cell phone. So I'm thinking, oh, okay. So he's either going to pass or he's saying they're in, right? Because he's a gentleman and he's going to call me personally. So I answer and I'm like, hey, he said, hey, Giles, couple things. One is love the deal. We're definitely going to get a term sheet. So I'm like, yo, you know, woohoo. So, because, you know, that's a lot. They were going to give us $100 million to get started. So, but here's what's funny. He goes, Giles, I'm looking at the equity part of this deal. You guys pay us back in the first 5 years because that was the original model was we were going to run the notes out the full 10 years. We weren't going to securitize. Bringing Mark in gave us the ability to securitize, and it really is a better model. Gives the investors liquidity sooner, which is obviously always a benefit. But anyway, so what's funny is he's like, I'm looking at years 6 through 10, and an enormous amount of money still comes back, but you've taken the debt out by then. So where's that money going? Now, obviously, this is a very smart man, so I know he knows where the money's going, right? So I'm going to know where it's going. It's going to me and my partners and the management team. And he laughed. He goes, yeah, that's what I thought. He goes, when you get my term sheet, you're also going to see it's not just for debt, it's for equity, right? Because they thought, you know, wow, that equity really is interesting. The other thing he said that was interesting, he goes, well, Giles, here's the thing. My one pushback on you is you guys are showing, you're projecting that you're going to have a 3% default rate. And I know you've done better than that so far, but come on, there's just no way. You're buying a portfolio of non-performing loans. Now, I understand you're cherry picking the very best ones. You're doing all that work, and that's why I love your model. But come on, you still can't run this at a 3% default rate. But here's what's funny, Ben. I said, well, you've got my financial model. You can make any changes in the model you want. Make it a 10% default rate. So if you change to a 10% default rate, am I going to have any trouble paying you back your principal and your interest? And he laughed. He goes, no, you're not. He goes, don't get me wrong. I get it. That's why we're giving you a term sheet. And then, so then we had term sheets from 5 different groups. And then we signed a term sheet for $350 million. So we were going to go very big, very fast. And COVID hit. And so that kind of knocked it sideways. We took a step back. That actually benefited us, though, because it gave us an extra year to have that company in our office running, to see the team work. And we realized, hey, you know, that lady right there, the president of the company, she seems like she runs everything. Her team is super talented. Everybody reports to her and answers to her. And then we kept saying, what does the CEO even do? He comes in at 10, he leaves at 2. He takes a 2-hour lunch in between. We just couldn't figure out what he was doing. So that's where we went when we decided to, hey, coming out of COVID, let's really put this back together and do it correctly. We basically took the team without the CEO. And then I called Mark Brenner and I said, Mark, I got a proposition for you. And this is what's pretty funny. Without missing a beat, he goes, Giles, if you want me to run all lending, I'm in. So I didn't even have to give a pitch. He's like, Giles, I've loved that model from 5 years ago when you showed it to me. And he goes, I know Mary Jo, so I've kept in touch with her, and I know it's performed even better than you had hoped. So he's like, I'm in. So that was kind of so anyway, so that's kind of from an investor's perspective, what we saw. Big market, underserved, but a really interesting way to do it. Again, like I said, for us, we just don't want to try to bring other people in with us unless we've really seeded the thing, really watched it. And so anyway, so that's worked out really well. And then like we talked about, the one really nice thing in this deal is the big institutions are right back there wanting in. The difference this time is we're like, hey guys, let's not go take $200 million right out of the gate and struggle to scale too quickly. That's a mistake, right? And so we're doing it correctly. So we're really excited to be talking to your group and working with your group. But then the nice thing for the investors in the equity and the debt, because like I said, what we're happy, one of the rights we give people who are coming into this first tranche of debt is the right to roll their money. So a couple of years from now, or 18, 24 months, when we go to take them out, what we will do is we'll offer them the right to just roll into the next vehicle, right? So if somebody comes in as an investor through you guys and they're happy with the investment, which we've been very happy as an investor, we expect them to be. My guess is for most people, they're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm earning 15%. I'm super over collateralized and protected. Why the heck wouldn't I keep right on doing that? So we do, even when we bring in the institutional money downstream, we always give the people to come in early and support the business the ability to stay and take that whole long ride. And then for the equity people, for anybody who's interested in the equity, that also, you'll be there forever. That's in perpetuity. Yeah. So what else would you like to talk about? Sorry. So that's kind of some of our perspective. Like I said, KG Investments, we've been a family office for 25 years. I think if you go to I think probably we're reasonable for the size family office we are, because, you have the U.S., you have Mark Zuckerberg has a family office. Elon Musk, I think, technically has a family office. Michael Dell. So as far as family offices go, we are not a large family office relative to the U.S. market. We always have lots of money out, but as a direct investor, as a family office who likes to seed early opportunities, really grow them up, coach them, manage them, sit on the boards, but be active. And then as a direct investor, I think our track record is as good as any family office. And it's funny, we have some huge family offices now who reach out to us because they're like, hey, you guys are the guys who know how to make direct investments. Can you look at this deal we're looking at with us, right? Because that's our reputation, is we do have a very long, very strong track record. And I think if your potential investors go to the website, they'll be able to see that, because most of our portfolio is on the website. And it's kginvest.net. And then they can see the portfolio. But so we do have a very long track record of being very good investors. And the way you become a very good investor is you have your share of failures as well, right? So we have some on there that didn't perform quite as well. But most of them, we've been very fortunate.
Of course. No, I have looked at your website actually, and you do have some very large names on there. I think going back to sort of 2004, quite a large tech firm, if I'm allowed to mention it, you invested in back there, if I'm correct.
Yeah. So what happened is we started off I was more the straight Wall Street type investor in the 90s. My partner, Alan Kaplan, my business partner, was an entrepreneur. And so he started a company in the mid 90s. It's called Global Center. And then one of the largest and still one of the largest U.S. Venture capital firms, Sequoia Capital, invested in his deal. He was 25 years old. And then here's kind of a funny story for international investors. Sequoia Capital gives him and his partner a term sheet. They were the first web hosting company for the web. So Andreessen creates Mosaic in the browser. All of a sudden, you have all these people trying to get on the web now because the world is being told it exists and there's an easy way to use it. There was a huge problem moving the traffic on the web early on, obviously with the dial-up, trying to get on through dial-up. So he came up with the idea of web hosting, and and at one point they hosted 70% of the web. So any Yahoo, Playboy, any of the early big content providers who were very big on the web had to mirror their businesses other places. Otherwise, the traffic was killing them. And Alan's company was the first company that figured out how to do that and started doing that. Building data centers, putting rows of servers, recreating their business so that if I'm in New York City and I wanted to get on a Yahoo, which is in California, I'm actually getting onto a mirrored Yahoo that's local to me so I can get on and off and in and out much quicker, and it's spreading that traffic around, right? But so Alan, so we then, we met in a deal in the 90s. I just right away was like, God, this guy is so smart. He really understands tech, and he really understands and being an entrepreneur. The one thing with the Wall Street guys is that's not our world, right? We understand once you become successful, we can get you liquid. We can scale you up. We can get you debt and equity. We can do all those interesting things, M&A, IPO, whatever. But honestly, if you're saying, hey, Giles, here's my business plan, I need help. 25 years ago, I was like, okay, I have no idea how to do that. Right now I do, obviously, right? So we just decided when the dot-com crash happened that that was going to be a great time to go invest in early stage companies, because the market, we went through a nuclear winter here in the US early stage tech market. 2001, 2, and 3, almost no activity. We were one of the most prominent guys in that. So I left my job in New York. I came out here. Alan and I started a fund that we call Milestone Equity Partners. We let one very, very wealthy US-based family in with us, and we funded 43 companies, and we had 8 exits, returned 5x our capital. So we did very well, but the market anomaly we were taking advantage of kind of ended at the end of 2003, because then all the usual suspects, Sequoia, Kleiner, Benchmark, and the guys, Ben Rock, whoever, all kind of came out from underneath the desk like Chicken Little, right? And said, hey, the sky's not falling. And they started funding again. So we realized, hey, this market opportunity that we've identified and really executed against, it's not going to be there anymore. So we stopped funding anything new. Spent about 5 years then really working that portfolio, helping them do next rounds, helping them make strategic decisions. And that worked really well. Then, and this is what's interesting, Ben, how we got into all those tech names. So we already were tech focused, but very early stage. And we'd had some very big winners. Limelight Networks came out of there, which we funded. We were the first money in. Plaxo, we were the first money in. And so Plaxo is an interesting story, because in April of 2009, we get this very strange call from a gentleman named Sean Parker. Sean, at the time, he was known for 2 things. He had done a company in the 90s called Napster, and he and his partner, Sean Fanning, had been, they didn't put him in jail, but the entire world sued them. And so they really caused a lot of trouble and problems. He then had come to us when we had our fund to do a company called Plaxo. When I met with him, I was like, okay, first off, I think this guy's 13 years old. And I was significantly younger than myself, but he really looked young. And so I'm like, wow, this guy really looks like a little kid. And the funny thing is he couldn't get out to where our fund was. So I was going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. My parents still lived in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and he was in Northern Virginia. So I ended up meeting with him. My first meeting with Sean Parker was in my parents' living room. So pretty funny. Long story short, we gave him we funded Plaxo. We eventually sold it to Comcast. It was a big win for us. But then, so we knew Sean. And then in 2009, he calls us and he says, hey guys, I just took a job and I'm the president of this company that's called The Facebook. And so, and I will admit freely, I'd never even heard of it. I'm like, okay, what is the Facebook? What in the world is that about? Like, you're going to publish a book with people's faces? Like, I don't know. It doesn't sound very interesting to me. Luckily, my partner is far more tech savvy than I am. I'm more markets and finance. And he was like, no, Giles, that's this college thing that's really blowing up. So we did our due diligence, and where we got lucky is because we had done Limelight Networks and they moved so much traffic through the web, we called them and a couple other guys like them, and we just said, hey, do us a favor. Do you have an account with the Facebook guys? And they said, and Limelight was like, yes, we do. And we said, okay, how's their traffic doing? They've been around a couple of years. Is the traffic growing? They literally like growing. These guys are going to take up our whole network. They're gapping up in how much internet traffic is coming to their site. It's unbelievable, Giles. We've never seen anything like it. So we were like, okay, something really big is happening here. And so we got very lucky. So we invested, we bought stock, private, bought a bunch of stock. and did super well. And that kind of got us into that world of those later stage tech deals, where I think the next one we did, I think, was LifeLock. And again, that was another interesting one where just a random stockbroker in Silicon Valley who we didn't even know, I calls my partner and I, and he's like, hey, I got you guys' name from some guy that knows you. And he said that if you guys will buy private stock from entrepreneurs or early employees. So long story short, we ended up doing a deal. There was an engineer leaving LifeLock. He had 3 weeks to exercise his options, but he needed $2 or $3 million to do that. He didn't have it. Otherwise, he'd lose them. So we dove in very quickly, realized that his options were the strike price was significantly below where that company was really valued at that point. So we did a deal with him where we lent the money against the stock. And the way it worked was when he sold his stock, because eventually, they went public and it was a very big win for us. But when they did that, we got our principal back, and then we split the upside with him. So it ended up working out very well for him, very well for us. So that's how we sort of got this reputation, particularly in Silicon Valley, of, hey, if you really need, there's this weird group in Scottsdale, Arizona, of all strange places, because certainly Scottsdale is not a finance center of anything. Tourism, golf. You want to golf? We got the best courses anywhere, but we're not a finance center. But they said, hey, these guys are in Scottsdale, but they're very smart, they're creative, and they're very fair. They'll move fast. And so that's now when you look at our portfolio, you see a lot of those late stage tech names. And then about 2015, 16, you started getting a lot of brokers in that world. And then you started seeing a lot more deals happening. So now most big family offices have some exposure to that market. One of the things that's been even that market, I think we've differentiated ourselves as well, though, because, we say no to the big tier one names. I'd say 9 out of 10 are a no right away. And even deals where sometimes we regret it. Palantir is a good example. So we saw Palantir very, very early, before anyone in the world really knew what it was. The problem was those guys, they wouldn't tell you anything about the business. Like, guys, you're asking us to buy stock from you, and well, what exactly do you do? Well, most of our contracts are with the CIA and NAS, and so we really can't tell you what we do. So we're like, well, then we really can't invest. It's like, guys, come on. But unfortunately, I wish we could have. But there's times as an investor, if you're smart, there are times where you're going to miss good deals, but for the right reasons. Does that make sense? And so another good example was Groupon. Groupon came to us super early. And we were very interested. We were like, hey, wow, you guys, they were telling us exactly what they were doing. And it was very interesting. We thought, hey, this could really grow. The problem with them was the accounting. So they sent us their financial model, and it just made no sense to us. And we did, I'm not kidding, we did, I think, 4 or 5 calls just to talk about the financial model. And literally 5 calls later, we still had no better understanding of it. And so we passed. Now, we would have done very well in the deal. But what's interesting is when they filed their S-1 to go public years later, I think it took them a year to get through the S-1 process. And the SEC had the exact same problems we had. Hey, guys, I don't get it. Because normally in S-1, you file an S-1 with the SEC if everything, your tier 1 deal, 60 days, 75 days max, to really get through that process. Then you got to do the work with the banks and et cetera. But the S-1 process shouldn't be overly long. It took them a year. And it was because the SEC kept coming back for the same reason we didn't like them, which was, guys, I don't understand. You're recognizing this is revenue. That doesn't look like revenue to us. Or all these different things. So we've been, again, our heart and soul is in, and this is weird too, Nathan and Ben, sometimes we'll see 1 or 2 deals a year that are like this deal, where it's early stage or it's getting a little bit later, but it still has this huge upside. No one's really recognized this market yet. Then you'll go a couple of years, you don't see a deal like that. And we're just doing more of those secondary transactions. But when you find a deal like this, and I'll give you a good example. We did a deal called Njoy, Njoy. It's on our website there. And I actually have a 1-page slick on it, investment slick on that, if anybody would like to see it. Just basically giving you kind of what we saw, what we did, what team we put together, and then how we exited. So it's kind of a cool deal because we did a little cool 1-page write-up that shows you kind of from entry point to exit, sort of all the process and how we looked at it, which if any investors are interested in understanding sort of how we look at the world better, I'm happy to send that to you, and you You can feel free to share that. So that was a deal that was in the e-cigarette space. And their mantra was, we're going to cure lung cancer. They really focused on smokers. So very different, unfortunately, than what a lot of that industry did later, like the Juuls of the world, where they focused on teenagers and non-smokers. Our entire target in Njoy was go after smokers and get them to convert from smoking to vaping. And then in one generation, you'll wipe out, lung cancer. So long story short, we met with that. They were a Scottsdale-based company. They were doing exceedingly well. They were the number one player in the space, ahead of Philip Morris's, ahead of Blue, ahead of, British Tobacco had a play. They were ahead of everybody. And they were a startup. So they were doing really well. The problem we had when we met with them, in the third year, they did over 100 million in revenue. So they were really scaling. But when we met with them, we just couldn't get comfortable with the CEO. We loved the story. We said, hey, this is going to be a really big market, right? There's smokers all over the world and most of those smokers are in countries where you have socialized medicine, which means the government should be incredibly incented to move them away from smoking to vaping, because it's going to save them literally. Think about China. It would save China trillions of dollars in healthcare down the road, right? To convert these smokers, because they have an enormous amount of smokers. So what happened was, well, we couldn't get comfortable. We loved the story, we loved what they were doing, we loved the market, but the CEO was not the right. He had done a great job to get them where they were. He just wasn't the right CEO to take them the rest of the way. He didn't see it that way. And we were polite about it, nice, but so we spent a lot of time with them. We never pulled the trigger. Sure enough, a year into this, the CEO makes an incredibly big fundamental mistake with a brand new product launch, where like 90% of their sales were one product. They created a new version, better and improved version of that product. The problem is they didn't do proper product testing. They were on path to IPO a year later, and they wanted to keep every quarter growing. And they thought, well, if we slow down and do full product testing, this quarter might be a little bit of a down quarter. That won't look good for our IPO. Big fundamental error. Who cares? You don't do that. You obviously do the proper product testing. This guy made the decision that we were worried he would make and didn't do that. So they had 40,000 distribution points in Europe, 80,000 in the US. They jammed the pipeline with this new product, and literally 30 days later started getting incredibly negative feedback that after about 30 days, it started getting this funky flavor, which obviously if someone's going to vape, they're not going to vape that. So because they used a new type of metal as part of the materials, and it had this very short shelf life before it had some chemical reaction with the liquid and caused this problem. The problem, Ben, was they put so much of this out into their entire distribution network that they didn't have the money to pull it back off the shelves. So literally, we get this emergency call from them. And this is a company that did 100 plus million in the third year and was the number one player in the space. They had raised $350 million from the private equity world in the US. Catterton, which is Bain Capital's consumer-focused fund, had a big investment. Morgan Stanley, either JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, I always mix those two up. One of those two had a huge investment, and Fidelity had a huge investment. But they were all in equity. They all did preferred stock and private equity. So we get a call from these guys, and they basically say, hey, guys, we've run into a little hiccup. Can you meet with us? So we like the team. We love what they're doing. We had passed on buying stock from them. We go and meet with them, with the CEO and the CFO, and they're like, hey, guys, we've got this slight hiccup. Would you guys do a $4 million bridge loan to us? And then with that, we think we'll get through this rough patch and be fine. So we spend some real time with the CFO. And when we walk out, my partners and I look at each other and go like, there's no way in the world $4 million is going to fix this problem. They're going to have to go into bankruptcy and clean this whole thing up. And it's going to take a while, right? It could ruin the business, but it's definitely going to take a while. And so they didn't see it that way. So then we'd never done a deal that was a bankruptcy deal. But so we thought, hey, you know what, guys? Look at the cap table. They don't have any debt. It's all equity. So if we actually did a small loan to these guys, we actually would control this whole company in bankruptcy. It was the craziest thing ever. So literally in bankruptcy, we have these massive, giant international private equity, banks and firms calling us. Hi, hey guys, we want to be your friend. So we did a convertible note with them. Sure enough, they ended up in bankruptcy. And we then, luckily, there was a guy on the board who really led the charge. We did it together. And it took a year to clean everything up. And then we brought in a very large private equity firm out of New York called Mudrick Capital, who's a distressed debt fund, and big players. They came in with us. And when we brought it out of bankruptcy in, I think about 2017, I'm close. It's around there. And we brought it out at a valuation of $50 million on the business. We sold it a year ago, August, to Altria for $2.7 billion. Now, we didn't own the whole company, unfortunately, but it was a very nice return for us and everyone who got involved through us.
Yeah.
But that was a great example of similar to what we did with this, what we've done now, I think, with alt lending, right? Where we see an opportunity that we think, wow, that could be really significant. And there's definitely, we do a lot of work. We talk to lots of folks, and we really come back with the conclusion that there's a real opportunity here. Now let's take our time. Let's seed this. Let's watch this thing work, and then we'll see what we do. So we were really closely involved with Njoy, with management, understanding what they're doing for probably 18 months before we did anything, right? And with this deal, alt lending, even longer. But those every 2 to 3 years, you just see a special, really interesting, very different special situation where it's kind of a combination of like a secondary deal and a startup. So it's got way less risk than a startup because it's so much further along and you're really protected on the downside, but yet it still has all the upside of a startup. So every now and then you just find that thing where your risk is really, really low. That's what we loved about alt lending. I'm like, guys, we're buying loans at 30, 35 cents on the dollar. And so when I pay the debtor back, this portfolio here, we'll take down 15 million from your guys. We'll buy 40, 50 million dollars in debt. We're going to then at some point we'll securitize that out or take that out. We'll pay you back your 15. There's going to be 20, 25 million dollars just sitting there. Yeah. That's profit, guys. And yet, so that's a fantastic return for the equity, but yet that's also collateral against all the debt. And then that's also collateral for the preferred stock because we've got the debt covered so much that a lot of that collateral ends up just falling naturally to the preferred stock because you're so over collateralized on the secured lender. So we were like, wow, this is really interesting. What a weird thing where we can have so much downside protection, yet have really, really interesting upside. So that's kind of what drew us to this. And like I said, those deals, you won't see anything that even remotely looks like that for years. Then you'll see something and then it's interesting. So that's kind of how we got to here.
Yeah, I think when we spoke before, Giles, you mentioned about it's one of the only debt markets that's not impacted by the rise and fall of interest rates and inflation as well.
Ben, I love that. And so what's interesting is because for ourselves, we have a large amount of money in direct deals. We also have a large amount of money in passive investments where we use, the Iconics, the Epics of the world, Morgan Stanley, whomever. And so we have hedge fund exposure, and we have bonds, and we have bond funds, but we don't do that ourselves. We do that we pass that off to those guys. But so we do have a large portfolio as individuals, right, Alan and I, of debt. The problem I have is I get a statement every month, and I look at it every 90 days. And then every now and then something will happen. You get into a rising interest rate environment for a year. And I'll get my statement and I'll call my guy and I'll say, hey, I don't understand this. I've got 8 different types of debt. I've got some direct bonds I own. I've got some hedge funds. I've got some ETFs. Everything's down the same amount. So isn't the definition of diversification that some of these things, when some are down, some are up, and they should not be so heavily correlated to each other? And what I found is it's much easier to do that, to really diversify yourself in that way and to have some negative correlations, less positive correlations in a portfolio. It's a lot easier to do that on the equity side than it is on the debt side. The debt side, unfortunately, most debt instruments, no matter what they are or where they are still fundamentally tied to interest rates. Mm-hmm. So if you get into a rising interest rate environment, they all are going to not maybe necessarily 1-to-1, but they're all going to move in the same direction, negative. And you get into a decreasing interest rate environment, you might do better. It's very difficult to get diversification. So Ben, you're right. I'm glad you reminded me of this because one of the things we really liked about this early on was I'm like, it's funny. These guys have no connection to interest rates. Interest rates go up, interest rates go down, just does not affect our cost of capital. It does not affect what we're doing with the loans, doesn't affect what we buy the loans for. It's just, so I was like, so if you have a portfolio if I'm an investor, larger family office or an investor, and I have different debt instruments, this is a fantastic fit in a debt portfolio because of exactly that. You're going to have times where we're 3 years into this, and interest rates have really spiked in the UK. You've had a year of rising interest rates. Hopefully they get their act together over there. So economically, so you have rising interest rates because things are going well, and you're going to have a lot of your portfolio down. This is not going to be, this is going to have moved the exact opposite direction. And so that, yes, that is one really thing I really like. Well, I like a lot is that, and it's very hard to find. And so, but yes, this definitely is not interest rate sensitive at all, which definitely makes it a really good fit in a portfolio of other types of debt, because it will have very low and even sometimes negative correlations to a lot of your other debt investments, which is actually a positive thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other thing that I touched on with Mark in one of the previous interviews is the impact of Trump. And he said it's a vast sort of break from the Biden era, which I think there's a lot of optimism maybe in the US. I particularly look on with jealousy at the golden age the US might be stepping into in the next 4 years. But Mark was mentioning about the rate of collections, which then has an impact on private student loans, and then naturally the collections that happen there, and the situation that borrowers in that space will need the package.
It's going to be, it's interesting, but here is what's interesting, and this is what really made me feel. So let's take a step back, and I'll answer your question, but let's take one step back because there's a really interesting point. So we had a portfolio of these loans going back 5 years. COVID hits. The federal government announces through Biden that they're going to give people a 90-day grace period. This is how it originally started. We're going to give you a 90-day grace period if you have federal student loans, because they have no control over the private student loans. But so they have no ability to forgive. They legally don't have the ability to forgive federal student loans, and they 100% don't have the right to do it in the private student loans. But that being said, they said, we're going to give everyone a 90-day grace period where you don't have to make a payment on the federal loans, and it won't count against your credit. We're not going to hurt you. We're not going to add more money, no negative. So they do that. They then decide to extend that to, and I think originally they did 2 or 3 of these 90-day rolls, and then they just said, screw it, we're not collecting. So what we did is we had a conversation with our management team, and we said, hey guys, we're a private student loan. We don't have any obligation to do that. But because the federal government's doing it, it seems like until we figure out what is really going to happen with COVID, and according to your perspective, it took some of us 3 to 6 months, and it took some people 6 years, and they still never figured it out. So we decide, hey, you know what? It's the right thing to do. So we send a letter to all our borrowers saying, we're going to give you a 90-day grace period, and you don't have to make a payment. Well, we eventually extended that to 2 years. So we basically said to our entire portfolio, you don't have to make a payment, and no negative penalties, not going to ding your credit. Guys, we never hit double figures of people who took us up on that option. 90+% paid all the way through. Now that tells me these guys, our underwriting is amazingly strong. Think about that. That's incredible. On the federal side, 99% took them up on it and never made a payment and have not made a payment in years, right? Literally almost, I think. It's nuts. Because the thing about our underwriting is, remember, it's a very deep underwriting. We have some real proprietary things we're doing to where if we're gonna buy Nathan's loan, Nathan has really shown that he is a good earner, that he's responsible with his money, that he's really motivated to pay. It's like, hey, Nathan's 27. He and his girlfriend really want to get married. They want to buy the first house, but his credit's upside down. So he's got a real motive. He's very motivated to clean that up, but he's got himself with this 20% interest rate in a hole he can't get out of. And then we show up, right? So I think what it really showed was that our underwriting is, think about that. I was stunned. I assumed that right away 50% would not pay, and probably most people would not make a payment as long as and it never got to double figures. I think it peaked at about, Mary Jo would have these exact numbers. I think it peaked at 6.8, 7%. That's it. It was amazing. So it really showed that the underwriting works, right? But so now let's fast forward. So now you've got DOGE, and you've got incredible waste in spending in our government, obviously. But then you also have just foolish things where, there's 200, I think the number's almost 300 now, $billion of student loans that haven't made a payment in like 4 years of any kind. So, for guys like Elon Musk who are coming in running DOGE, they're like, okay, well, we're definitely going after that first, right? Because They owe us all this money. That's the easiest money to go after. And look, it's not. So I think what's going to happen, unfortunately, and this is why it's very important that we scale quickly, right? Because we're going to have, I think, the next 18 to 36 months, there's going to be a tsunami of paper, right? Because all of these people have gotten comfortable making no payments. And now literally every single one of them is going to be told, you now have to start paying right now. And you're going to have an enormous amount of people. So it was already a huge market for us to cherry pick. And honestly, I think we'll do a couple $1 billion this paper. The opportunity just got bigger, right? Because particularly in the next 5 years, where they're going to aggressively collect this paper. And again, we're sitting there with a solution to help you, right? And so you're going to have a lot of very motivated borrowers. So yeah, I agree with Mark, I think. And like I said, that article, which I'll make sure we get it out to you, that's the whole, it's a very long article, and it's talking about the fact that Biden tried to forgive money. He tried to do this, he did that. And the problem is significantly bigger the day he left than it was the day he got there. So I'm excited. I think the next 4 or 5 years will be really good for us.
Yeah, and I think we briefly skirted around it earlier. It's about the bankruptcy remote nature of student loans as a whole. So even in bankruptcy, you can't discharge these loans. So
no, it's what we are in a very good position with, where all the protections that the Congress has passed over the years to protect student borrowers, but also to protect the lenders, we get all of those protections. The only thing we don't get is the federal government has no ability to affect our loans. Like maybe there's some way they'll figure out how to start forgiving federal student loans. And what's funny about that is if that happens, that actually benefits us, right? Because almost anyone with a private student loan also has a federal student loan. Yeah. So if they're paying back our debt and then one of the things we do with our underwriting is we do try to help them with the federal student loans. There are some ways where we can suck some of that in and protect and into our program, or steer them to groups that can try to help them somewhat with that. So, so the good thing is on the bankruptcy remote, I think really it has to be Nathan. If Nathan declared bankruptcy and he had a large amount of student loans, he would have to show that he was basically incapacitated. Like, I was in a car accident and I can't work, or so. You're talking about it's almost impossible to discharge these in bankruptcy. So these guys can go into bankruptcy, they can clean up the rest of their stuff, but that doesn't change one dime, unfortunately. But fortunately for us, but once they're in our program, they're able to make the payments. So
yeah, so maybe just to sort of begin to wrap up, if you had to say 3 points to an investor that's worried about security, when talking about distressed, delinquent, defaulted loans, immediately the alarm bells perhaps might start ringing. So what would be your top 3 reasons why this is an investment that is risk mitigated, perhaps I'll put it?
Well, a couple things. One is, what's interesting is we are technically buying stressed loans, right? But, and again, I would argue that point, because I don't buy their loan when it's sitting that way. Our team is spending 90, 60, 90 days with a bunch of very high bars for these people to get over. So we're really, by the time we buy that loan, I really believe we've turned that into a performing loan. Now, technically in the U.S. market, and I'm not sure how it is in Europe, but in the U.S. market, if I have a portfolio of distressed loans and then I want to call that legally, technically, a portfolio of performing loans, I need to seed it. I need to have it perform for 12 months. We're already 90 days into that process, guys, and we're paying dramatically less. So one of the things I would say is I really think we're buying performing loans, not non-performing. Legally, we are buying non-performing, but if you really look at the work that goes in before I ever make an offer to buy it, I've already done a lot of credit repair and a lot of work with that borrower. The second thing is the collateral protection, right? So if you are going to invest in distressed, stressed anything, right, you better have a lot of collateral protection. And so if you look at US-based mutual funds, Fidelity mutual funds, and they'll have junk bond funds, which is similar, I guess, in risk. And they'll tell you that, hey, this is over collateralized 1.2 to 1, 1.15 to 1. Maybe if you're really deep, it's 1.3 to 1. And you usually don't find that. Guys, we're buying at 30, 35 cents on the dollar. We are dramatically over collateralized. We're over collateralized 2.5 to 1. So, and now you can't find that. Like in the US market, if I wanted to buy some asset where I'm over collateralized, I don't know how I would do that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where you'd even go, right? It doesn't really exist. So we are so the positive for the investor is, and we are one, and I'm speaking of myself and my partners in this because we are one of the investors. What we really liked about this as an investor was that it's like, guys, look, that default rate we'd have to have like another global Great Depression for the next 3 years for us to even be worried about our principal, because that collateral protection is so deep and it's so big that like I said, Ben, a lot of the guys who want to come into the equity side of this, they're doing it because there's so much extra collateral that goes to the senior lender, but they're like, guys, as soon as you pay out the senior lender, which the people that put the money in the debt, then there's still a ton of collateral left over that covers the stock. So the preferred stock. So that's another point that's really important, is that, for the protection and the downside is we're very over collateralized. Then the bankruptcy remoteness, the fact that the federal government has no ability to do anything to the private sector loans, number one. And then number two, it's bankruptcy remote. So think about any other, and I'm not sure exactly how bankruptcy works in Europe, but in the US market, I can bankrupt out of everything, guys. I can bankrupt out of my mortgage. I can bankrupt out of a business loan. I can bankrupt out of credit card debt. I can bankrupt out of every lick of debt I have, except the IRS, if I'm behind paying them, and student loans. That's it. So think about that. Talk about you can't have a higher level of legal protection in the US market other than the IRS. So, and they don't have better protection than we do. We just have the same protection. So that's pretty darn good, right? So as far as, because again, I'm with you. I don't care what rate of return something's going to make me. I care about the downside. Yeah. And then if I feel like I can protect myself, and this has been our philosophy forever, if we feel like we can protect ourselves, even on the equity side, we are always looking at what's our downside. First and foremost, okay, the market looks interesting. It does look like there could be real upside. Okay, now the first work I'm going to do is, can I structure this in a way where I'm protected? Because the upside is really exciting, but my downside is all the way down, is bad. I'm not going to do that, right? It's just a lot of investors do. They'll chase these crazy returns and put their money at risk. We don't do that. And we don't even do it in the equity, believe it or not. And we really are careful with how we structure, how we get into anything. And so that's, again, what I really love here is that first and foremost, we have really heavy downside protection compared to any other thing you can do when it comes to asset-backed lending or any kind of distressed. We're just so over collateralized with a asset that is so protected by our bankruptcy laws. And so it works out very well. So I think that's kind of was our thinking on, how protected we are. And then the nice thing is, because we're able to buy at such a great rate, that we can offer a above market rate of return and still run the business very successfully. So now what I expect is when we take down the first big institutional tranche, that probably we won't be paying 15. We are 13.5. We'll probably get that down to 11.5, 12. Now, for the guys who come in now, we'll still let them roll at their current rate, but only them. Because I'd say by the third securitization, I expect this to be an 8 to 10% cost of capital to us. So getting in now is helpful to people. And that's just because once the institutions see one full securitization, then to them, okay, this asset really performs. My downside is super protected, but yet they still have all this extra collateral way above what I normally demand. So I'm way more protected than usual. So therefore, that will really help us downstream with bringing our cost of capital down.
Perfect. Well, Giles, I think we'll wrap up there. That was incredible. I really enjoyed that, Giles. So
thank you. We've never had an investment where we were interviewed. I've been interviewed. I used to do stuff with Fox and ABC a million years ago. I was one of the guys that come on to argue with other guys when something big happened in the market.
But Giles, thank you very much for today. I know you're busy. Enjoy the rest of your day. I look forward to
thank you, Ben. Nathan, nice to meet you.
Thanks, Giles.
Cheers.
All right, thanks, guys.